Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April webinar in AgilQuest's Agile Workplace Leader Series. Our educational lectures and panel discussions bring in leaders and innovators in workplace strategy, as well as practitioners from the field to benefit and support the way you do your work in your organization. Thank you for joining us today. As usual, today's webinar is not focused on our hoteling technology, but rather on what real organizations are doing to make their program and their use of technology work for their goals and their people. Today's webinar is the first of two in a series designed to arm you with the tools and ideas you need to make your workplace more attractive, more productive, and to better reach your workplace program goals. Our title today is Tactics for Improving User Adoption and Buy-in for Workplace Change Programs. And as we all know, that's a major component, truly a critical element of our program success. We have a jam-packed session today, and we have industry experts and innovators from leading organizations around the world with us to share their knowledge and experience. Please bear with us as we do our best to fit their knowledge and experience into a very short 45-minute time slot. If we do that, we'll save 15 minutes or so at the end to take your questions and have the panel respond live. Our distinguished and experienced panel today consists of Kate North from ework.com, who brings her industry experience in both training and the evolution of workplace programs, Susan Leach, who will share her experience running change management for Cisco's internal workplace program, Dawn Christen will share her knowledge and insight from Booz Allen Hamilton's program, and Mark Capro from GSA's flagship workplace program at their Washington, D.C. headquarters will share some of the examples of ways he's achieved success on his program. And I, Torrance Houlihan, Vice President of Product here at AgilQuest, will share some tactics from our customers and some insight from our 20 years of implementing programs with organizations around the world. So with that, we'll get started. As we all know, implementing a workplace change program can often be a challenging situation. We, the implementers, are committed to change. We have big goals, often very real, quantitative, measurable goals that we're being held to, and there's investment that's been committed to us to help us achieve success. But along the way, we very often get pushback from managers who are resisting our program, and we sometimes suffer from a lack of adoption among our end users who really need to embrace the program for us to achieve the success that we need. So the question that faces us, of course, is what can you do? What are the organizational level solutions? And more importantly, what are the tactics that everyone on this call can implement today to help drive success in their change program? What we're going to hear today are those tactics, some things that you can actually do, take away from this webinar and implement. These are coming from your peers and industry experts, people who have been in the trenches, who have been there and done that and are doing it today and every day to help drive success in their organizations. And we're going to talk about very specific solutions and approaches to help address very common challenges like managers saying, I can't manage people who I can't see. Helping end users overcome the fear or the concern about a loss of a desk if you're implementing a mobility program. Making sure that people are able to work in an unfamiliar environment if they're used to going to the same place every day, but now they're working in a more mobile way. And then, of course, overcoming one of my favorite ones, which is people say, you know, this kind of a program is too hard or it takes too much of my time in order to be successful. So with that, I will hand things over to Kate North, who will go through her material and show us what she's done in order to achieve success for her and her customers.
Great, thanks, Doug, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today. This is a passion that I have, so please excuse maybe my enthusiasm around it. In this 7 minutes that I have to share with you what I believe to be are some of the key things and reminders, I'm going to be really teeing up some of the key foundational concepts around this. But don't worry, we've got many of our other presenters are also going to be going through and picking up on some of the things that I'm going to be teeing up in a little bit more detail. And as I reflected and prepared for this, one of the key things that came to mind is that oftentimes the things that we need to do to further gain adoption are also the same things that we need to do when we are developing and implementing a program from the get-go. we can't take our foot off the pedal on many of these. And I think oftentimes that the teams kind of reach a little bit of exhaustion by the time their program rolls out. And it's really kind of the time where the fun just begins. And so the importance of keeping this information fresh and, keeping your eyes open for new ways to evolve, I think is also going to be a really important component of it. So without further ado, I'm going to just move us into the next one. So this is my little checklist. And the first one is, I have just found throughout the years to be foundationally so critical, and that is that you've got to keep your leaders on board and having them actively demonstrate new behaviors. And that could be done through videos and different means. We have abilities throughout our training to be able to help reinforce that the leaders are on board and that they are also talking about how this program fits within the broader strategy of the organization. And then alongside with that is having them actively using the spaces that have been developed. I think oftentimes teams will sit back and wonder, if they can really use some of these more informal spaces, or people will think that they're just, not working anymore. And so getting these leaders to actually begin to use them is a really important component of that. And I also know that within the evolution of a program that oftentimes you'll go through a different set of senior leaders, and so you've got to bring them on board, get them educated, but really asking them for ongoing support. The second one ties kind of directly to this, and that is giving them context. Kate Lister and I from Kate's Global Workplace Analytics, and it's got a fantastic calculator tool that allows for people to, at a high level, understand what is the ROI on the programs, and works very closely at the very beginning stages of a project. And she and I recognized early on that there were opportunities for that information to trickle down further that could help onboard people so that they can understand why exactly are we doing this. And we called a program that we developed called the Case for Change, which is really around just reinforcing why the organization has decided initially to even go forward with this particular project. And one of the key things that we highlighted is really the importance of being able to drill that down into the individual group. So perhaps what's in it for me is going to be different from an executive perspective than that of the manager or the employee. But, always pointing back to helping them understand why this initiative is critical to the business. Let's see here. Here we go. Okay, and then the big one, and Susan Leach following me will dive a little bit more into this, but through a lot of research that's been done, the biggest barrier for these programs is mid-level managers. And it's really no surprise in the sense that none of us have really been trained or mentored to lead distributed teams or virtual teams. And so when you no longer have the line of sight to be able to see what people are doing, the ability to lead people that they can't see feels very scary for a lot of managers. And so being able to help them really understand measuring by result and how they begin to use their technology to really begin to further keep their teams connected and engaged can help them build a new set of skills that will be really important for their teams as they begin to adopt that. And that can be done in a number of different ways to really help them get on board with that. The other piece is around integrating and welcoming or creating an integrated and welcoming employee experience. When these programs take place, oftentimes they are disjointed, and I guess my plea would be is to try to really integrate and weave them so that it's not just about the physical place, it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the policies, but they all come together to really allow for the employees to think differently about the work in which they've been asked to do. And if we can do that, we've broken it down into two specific areas. One is around how to work differently. So this kind of tees back up into working with managers and developing a skill around how to lead a distributed team. The same thing is important for the employee. How do I stay connected and engaged to a team that's now quite distributed? The other part of it is around where am I going to be working and looking at all the new choices that we provide from them, whether it be from home or activity-based settings. The next one is also about the technology, making sure that the managers and all of the team really know how to use the technology tools that have been given to them. When we looked at where the resistance of the managers stemmed from, much of that came forth from the fact that they really didn't have a comfort level with the technology tools. Next up is really thinking about how to make that change easy and intuitive. We use the term edutainment, which is a bit about education and entertainment together. But to do that, you want to give them time and not put everything until the program and the project's ready to go. And that starts with also the adoption for the evolution of it as well, is to chunk things out so that people can absorb them. We found personally that by helping them address the skills first before you start talking about the place can help with them, but also be able to provide this information in a number of different ways, recognizing that people learn and having both an asynchronous and an asynchronous way could be very helpful to them. So the fun has just begun. I guess probably one of my key understatements is really just know that this is going to be a continual process and a continual journey for you. And you're going to need to keep the marketing going. One of the things I think is really great when you're able to actually get stories back from the business, from people that have made that transition. They are your best spokespeople. And so developing and lobbying for marketing help and support to make sure that that continues on, grabbing little videos and things like that of the people that have said, yes, I've done this, and, I found it to be so much more effective. We can make better decisions. We've got better work-life balance. Those kinds of things can really help support that. And then evolving a strategy based upon the data that you're collecting. I can't underscore enough the importance of being able to collect the data so that you can make informed decisions around the program as it starts to take off, because that'll allow for you to be able to continue to evolve it and address those things that perhaps haven't worked, or be able to look at new opportunities for you to further evolve that. And that not only comes from the surveys and some of the harder data, but also around observation around how people are beginning to use it. What do you notice when you walk through the spaces? And then finally, just be bold and be patient. As we know, these programs are heavy lifting. I mean, they're very powerful. Workplace transformation is a tremendous opportunity to be a part of. But it doesn't happen overnight. You're changing the way in which the organization is really coming together. And do not lose courage, and don't and be patient through that particular. Be patient through the process. So those are my top 7, and I'll turn it back now over to Torrance.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I'd just like to point out one quick thing to everyone. Please do submit your questions to our panelists as we're going through. Don't feel like you have to hold them to the end. We will queue the questions, but while they're on your mind, please submit them in the Q&A section in the lower right-hand part of your screen. And then when we finish the panel discussion, we'll be happy to move into those questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move over to Susan Leach, who's going to share some of her experience running Cisco's program.
Hi, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I work in a global company, so I never know what time it is anywhere. So I'm sure it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So I'm really happy to be here and to talk about some of the key learnings that we have found to be very helpful, and that we found out there's, trying to think about all the things that I'd love to tell you. There's so much we have learned, and so I wanted to focus on some really key things. Cisco being Cisco, we have so much technology, collaborative technology, and all sorts of, we create most of the stuff that people use to have a mobile environment, and so you would think that this type of change for Cisco would be really, really easy, and it's not. So don't underestimate. If you take nothing else away from me in talking, it's do not underestimate the impact of this change. And this is what we have found out as we're rolling out our Cisco Connected Workplace throughout our entire portfolio worldwide. Even though we have so much of the technology, when you start to touch people's physical environment, people can start to panic. And because there is just so much change in general in the work environment, especially if you're in a technology company, change is just happening. We're starting to see change saturation. And so what we are finding is that we're called workplace resources. When the workplace resources team comes knocking on the door and we're saying, hey, we're here to, turn your building into a Cisco-connected workplace building where we're going to change your environment and bring in a new occupancy model and going into a group assignment and taking away entitlements. And although the technology doesn't change that much for them, the environment is. It is amazing how impactful and how panicked people get because of one of the certainties that they have with all the change around them is that they know that there's a seat with their name on it. And now we've just come in to tell them that that's changing. And so we find that it's sometimes a little bit like the game of Jenga where we're that like one thing that we're pulling out, and if we don't do it really well, the whole thing will crumble. And what we find is that a lot of the angst that the employees are having or leadership is having around stock prices or reorgs or new technology that they're trying to get out or pressures within, everything starts to descend on this type of project. And for us, it's in the delivery of the Cisco Connected Workplace and our occupancy model. And all of that anxiety comes tumbling down on our project because it's so tangible. This is probably one of the most tangible things that people experience in a company is, especially within Cisco, where we're taking away entitlements. We're taking away, we don't produce offices anymore. We don't have that space type anymore. And so it really becomes an emotional journey for people. And some of the quotes that you see in the bubbles are actual quotes. These are things that we've heard as we've gone through it. And one of the things that we do is we prep our own organization and our own project team to be able to recognize where people are in the change curve. Where are they, based upon what the client is saying, are they in denial? Are they in anger? What's coming next? Just remember after denial comes anger, and just remember after anger comes bargaining. And so we try to help our own team as well as help the client through this change. But it's really important to not underestimate. A lot of people think that these changes, it's just a move, or we're just changing the furniture, or we're just, it's not that big of a deal. It's absolutely probably one of the biggest deals that a company can do because it fundamentally can shift the culture of a company just by changing the environment. One of the key things that we have found, and there's a lot of learnings that we have, but one of the biggest things we have found is it's so important to get your mid-level managers on board. And it's the senior manager to vice president level. Those folks in between those two areas are the most important because they're the ones that are going to be the hit hardest with this change. It actually is not as hard for your individual contributors than it is, it's much harder for your mid-level managers because they are actually losing that sense of office. They're losing that status symbol that's been in the work environment for, 1,000 years, that as you promote, you get a bigger office, better location, and, it's a status symbol that now is going away. It's a paradigm shift. And so what we've done is we've basically handhold these folks through this change curve by providing them training, providing them focus groups, the ability to have that conversation back and forth with us to help them be able to think, get them out of the despair and into seeing the possibilities. Because people that have been used to sitting in office and haven't had to mingle with everybody out on the floor sometimes feel very uncomfortable with that. So we help them in a very safe environments to talk through those. What is that going to look like? How are you going to do that? We also educate everyone around them, which then also gives peer pressure to make sure that they aren't falling into bad behaviors. But the key thing is really helping them by training, providing training with some really great best practices on working with distributed teams, working in a mobile environment, working in our Cisco Connected Workplace, and then giving them additional tools on how to make decisions and within our new occupancy model, allowing them to make decisions on how they use the space envelope that's being given to them. So it gives them a sense of control and really hand-holding them through this process. Because if you can get your mid-level managers on board and seeing the possibilities and really see how it can actually become a productivity tool for them, and how it can help them, and being able to get that information across to them and allow them that dialogue back and forth to think it through and process it through the change curve, you really will see adoptions skyrocket. That's what we have found. Where we've been successful to do that, we've had great adoption. This is the key, though. This is the moneymaker here, is do not forget about your admin assistants, because who's supporting those mid-level managers? Who are the people that are really going to be able to help those mid-level managers through this? Are their admin assistants. Because we have found we've made mistakes where we have forgotten about this stakeholder group until the end, and it has actually worked against us. So now they're one of the first groups we work with, and we work with them on a regular basis. And because they, number one, they hold the calendars to all of your mid-level and senior managers. They are the ones also that are going to help the managers know how to reserve the right space or move about within the space. And if you don't work with them, they will actually force your managers to revert back into old habits. So it's really getting in front and getting the admin assistants or the executive assistants on board quickly and early, and really work with them as ambassadors, as change champions, whatever term you want to use them, but don't forget about this stakeholder group. They have a ton of influence, and they're really, really, really vital in being successful and having successful adoption. So don't forget about them. So my little top 5 is, one of the best things is make sure you have an executive mandate with a vision. It really is helpful. We have struggled in some areas without that, where we're pushing it from the bottom up. It just makes the journey a lot harder. So having that executive mandate with a really solid vision, it's just good change management practice to have that. It's also incredibly helpful to have what I call the 3-legged stool. Your real estate organization, your HR organization, and your IT organization working together. And whether that's at a strategic level, it's actually at both, at a strategic level and at a local level. It's really important to have that 3-legged stool. And we know if you have a 3-legged stool and one of the legs is short or missing, it's really hard to sit on that stool. So having all 3 groups work together saves time, saves energy, both at a strategic level and at a local level. Again, getting your managers on board and staying with them through the journey is really, really important. And then, again, embracing the executive assistants. I can't even emphasize that enough. Don't forget about them. They will be your biggest advocates or your worst nightmare. So having them be advocates is much more advantageous. And then the other piece is the data. Cisco has been capturing workplace data for years and years and years, and we continue, and you actually, I think, can go to the next slide. There's a slide that talks about this. We leverage our data, both our survey data. We do an annual customer stat survey. It really will. We also do pre-post on every one of our buildings that we roll out to. It really helps us, and we do observation studies as well, and it really helps us to hone our solution. It also helps us to not have knee-jerk reactions to things, so that we can actually realize, is it an environment issue, or is it more of a facility management issue? You know, really what's driving the lower score or the higher score, and it helps us do analysis. It also helps us refine our program. And it gives the ability to really, over the years, our program has evolved, and it's really the data that has allowed us to do that, as well as to sell the program, because we have data that is really showing that the more mobile people are, the more of a higher achiever they are, less attrition. We have a lot of data that shows that. Working with HR, having the workplace data with the HR data together is really powerful for our senior executives to really show them the importance of being able to provide this environment. And then it also, one of the other things with data and kind of keeping your ear to the ground is being aware of new work practices that are happening within your organization. So one of the things that's evolving for us is our engineering organization shifting from a certain development style into the more agile work style, or how they do their development. And it's actually forcing a change in how we're laying out the space for them. And so being able, and those things happen within engineering, they could happen within sales, they could happen within marketing, really understanding how their work practices are evolving and keeping that connection with them so that our work environment can evolve with them. So data is really important, whether it's hard data or soft data. It's really important to capture and retain that and keep your eye on it as you go forward. So.
Wow, Susan, that is great information, and I'll underscore your story, your experience with the administrative assistants. That's something that I know in our experience at AgilQuest has been key for us in achieving success in our deployments also. It's really a terrible oversight if you don't fully consider the needs and concerns and sometimes the fears of that stakeholder community. So that's a huge point. People often think about the manager and can overlook the assistant, and that's just a terrible mistake. That was awesome information. Thank you. Kate, you've got some thoughts, I know, about how to best distribute this information out to people. How about you take us through this?
Sure. Just real quickly, it kind of gets back to one of the topics that both Susan and I have kind of reinforced around, is making it easy for people to step into this new way of working and knowing that they've already got a lot going on and that the change is swirling around them. How do we help them understand the information that they will need in order to be successful? And within our own environment, within eWork, and then we work with AgilQuest in deploying a product called AgilWork, we've been experimenting with being able to take our training and put it onto an app, iPad or an Android version. And this is following a massive trend that's happening within a lot of organizations today, is really thinking about how can people learn on the go, or M-learning, mobile learning. And one of the key things that we have found through that is that it does enhance the user experience in the sense that it gives them the ability to, have a tactile experience with the training or the information that would be received. It allows for them to kind of think about, and again, have more choice around what device is going to do I have that's easy for me to absorb the information. So if I'm taking a train ride into Chicago and I've got 10 minutes, what might I already have downloaded on my iPad that allows for me to absorb some of that information further? I think the key thing to keep in mind is with any type of training and communication is to keep it short so that people can absorb the information and then they can apply it, and that they can feel like something actually gets done. And that there's going to be probably a series of different topics that are going to be all appropriate for them as they begin to think further about this new way of working and what that really means to them. The other piece that we also recognize is that for all of you that are leading the types of change and transformation is that you want to be able to have things that are easy to deploy, especially as you begin to get traction and you need to scale. And we find that scalability often, certainly with the work that we're doing with Cisco, is that it goes into a lot of different parts of the world, and in some cases you might need to be able to have the work translated, knowing that people oftentimes will speak, U.S. business English, but if you're really trying to shift behavior, perhaps having it closer into their own language is important. And being able to do that, knowing that you've got a very limited team, and being able to deploy and leveraging that technology can be quite helpful. So hope some of those concepts are something that would be helpful for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because more and more of us are watching videos on our mobile devices. So what you're really doing here is leveraging the way people want to experience things and putting them on the devices that they're carrying with them every day. And
yes,
we've done a
right.
similar thing with our software interfaces, where we've tried to deploy the right solution to the right technology for how people want to work, whether that's a web-based interface if people are sitting on the couch at home, a kiosk as you're walking through a foyer, a smartphone using location-based services to help people with quick transactions, or even being on the phone on their desk. I think what you're hitting on, what I'm talking about, is people like to interact, or people have preferences, personal preferences, with how we like to interact with technology. And for us to be successful and drive the change and communicate with those people, we need to deliver things in the way in which they would like to receive it. One of our customers did something really interesting, We have an open API to our software. We call it the Onboard Express API. It's a full feature set of our software available on a technical integration level. And they looked at our interfaces, and they used many of them very, very broadly. But they wanted to take the experience that the people were having and personalize it to their culture and tie it into some of their other technologies. So what they did in order to drive that experience into the technology and the interface and the path that they wanted was they tapped into that API and developed interfaces into Microsoft Outlook and into a smartphone interface. This is some pictures of their iPhone interface. They also have an Android one that's tied back into their HR system. It's tied into other systems within that organization. And what they did was they were able to deliver the experience that they wanted, with the colors, the styles, the branding, the interaction into the technologies that people wanted to use, be it Outlook or an iPhone or what have you, while driving the behavior, because all of the business rules of the system are fully enforced through this. And back to a point that both Kate and Susan made, they're getting the data on the back end of this so that they can measure what's happening along the way. So I know, well, Kate and I are certainly big fans of the mobile devices as ways of communicating out to people. There's more to communication, certainly, than just the technology. And Dawn from Booz Allen is going to help us understand some of those other communication issues and challenges.
Hi. So as we all know, communication is the key. One of the first steps of moving into the hoteling environment is deciding what users and desks will be hoteling. At Booz Allen, anyone that is level 3 or below hotels. Those with special needs for desks, setup, or equipment is handled through special allocations. This needs to have your upper management buy-in and needs to be pushed down by upper management and stakeholders to be successful. Users want to know why. Let them know the cost benefits of reducing prime real estate and let them know it's more money for projects and paychecks. Users want to know how to hotel in advance. What we do here is about 90 days before go live, we send an announcement that the change is coming. 60 days before go live, we send notification to users that will move into the hoteling environment. And this helps them get used to the idea that it's coming. We have screenshots of the kiosk in there. We talk about how quick and easy it is to make reservations to check and how to check in and out of them. 30 days before go live, have a brown bag and actually walk users through the process, show them the floor plans of what areas will be hoteling so that way they get acclimated. Try to have some incentives for the hotelers. At Booz Allen, we get to work from home a couple of days if we hotel. We provide lockers, and we keep snacks for hotelers only. Once hoteling's been in place for about 30 days, have a pizza party or bring in cookies and just ask the users how you can make the hoteling easier for them. The more they feel involved, the better it seems to go. And that's really what I have for this slide, Torrance. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, what's interesting is it's doing those communication approaches, the pre-communication, the pre-rollout communication, the post-rollout communication to check in and continuously improve is vitally important. And then what you can add to that mix, add to that conversation when you're doing those post-rollout conversations is some real information, some real data about what is and isn't being used. This is just a simple chart that shows, in this case, it's what the presence count was versus what the capacity was. So if people are saying, hey, the office is too crowded, or I can't get this kind of space or that kind of space, it's easy for you to look back, again, back to the data that Susan and Kate were talking about. Go back to the data, you get the information so that when you're having those post-rollout conversations, you really have something to rely on and something that is there and people can talk about and feel good about. And it gives you that basis for continuous improvement. Maybe they really are filling up a certain kind of space and they really do need something else. With the data, you can see that and you can offer that. And that feeds right back, to Dawn, to you about making things easy for people.
Yes. You have to make it easy. you have to have help everywhere. In the pre-rollout email, add in the help desk number, the concierge number, and any kind of information you think that they can need. Day one, have help at the kiosk, walk around, ask if anyone needs help, have tip sheets at each desk with every number and link that they could possibly need, where printers are, how to connect to them. And if you have an online training video, and you can add the links to the link to it in the onboard portal and also in your tip sheet, that really helps. We also created we called it the Way We Work webpage with all the information users need, and it really helped to take a lot of the questions and the stress off of the support staff.
You know, what's interesting, Dawn, is your workplace environment, you've driven such a high level of utilization, and these are some really fundamental things that everybody should be looking at and thinking about, whether they're just starting a program or they have a program as mature as yours, to make sure that it is easy. You know, finding the printer, that's something that a lot of organizations don't think about when they start to implement a mobility or workplace change program. You know, where will I print? Where do I put my stuff, and so forth. So those are great questions to make sure that everybody's thinking about, regardless of how mature their workplace program is or how large it is. It doesn't matter if you've got 100 people or 10,000 people in your program. Now, it's interesting, Mark Capro from GSA is going to talk to us a little bit about, or we'll have a conversation about some of the experiences similar to yours, Don, about the things that have really made a difference for him and the program that he has there. And the first one, Mark, is leading by example. And what have you all done at GSA to help lead by example?
Well, at GSA, we changed our headquarters building from a building of all permanently assigned offices and cubicles to almost 100% hoteling open office spaces. Everyone sits in the same open workspaces. Even GSA's administrator, whose office was the second largest in federal government, not by choice really, we inherited it from the Department of Interior when we got this building in 1949. But it was not until we went to 100% hoteling that the previous and current administrators moved out of that office and moved into reservable space. The current administrator has permanently assigned space, but it's the same as everybody else has. It's just an area of the building that was near his old office. His old office was converted into a conference room that's available for anyone to use.
Driving from the top really is important, and we've heard that not only within the government, as you're talking about, but in publicly traded corporations, in partnerships. We hear it a lot, frankly, in partnerships, where to get the partners to embrace this is a real statement of how to drive the change in the organization. So leading from the top, always important. It's also important, I think, for people to be able to know that they're going to meet. And you have a solution that you've implemented at GSA for making sure that people know they're going to have a place to work.
Well, before we converted to 100% hoteling and a 100% shared building, we had a lot of conference rooms all over the building of various sizes. They each belonged to a different organization. And when you wanted to make a reservation, you had to call around from this person to that person. And we converted the entire building to a one organization, all shared space. All the rooms are reservable. And there are many, many, many more conference rooms. But then in addition to that, there's a lot of times you want to have just a little meeting, 2 or 3, 4 people. You don't necessarily want to make a reservation. A lot of these meetings are last minute kind of things. So we also have scattered throughout the entire building. And in our building, it has all these different little wings and floors. It has 7 floors, and each floor has 5 wings on it. So we've scattered through every wing and every floor, little 2 to 4 person conference rooms. People can just walk in and grab. They have a sign on the door that says not reservable, can only be used for up to 2 hours. Please don't make it an office. And people just go in and grab those as they need.
You know what I like about that is I've often talked about space and whether or not it needs to be reserved kind of exists on a continuum, where some space simply shouldn't be reserved. You should have space available for exactly what you're describing. so that people can meet in a spontaneous way and collaborate to solve problems. That's essential in our workplace. And other space at the far other end of the spectrum certainly should be reserved. High-valued conference rooms, video rooms, and so forth, and even offices for someone, like I live a great distance from our office. I don't want to drive more than an hour and not have a place to go to work. So in order for me to be effective, I need to make sure that some of our workspace is fully reservable so that I can book that in advance. This is a great example of that, you know, how space exists on that continuum of reservation need, everything from don't reserve it to absolutely reserve it and control it. And in order to make your workplace work, you need to understand that. Some people, they swing the pendulum all the way one way where nothing is reservable, or they swing it all the way the other way where everything has to be reserved, and that doesn't always work for people. The other thing that you've experienced is people want to be able to control their own areas. How have you addressed that?
Well, in GSA, everyone either makes a reservation or has a long-term reservation. We allocated about 10% of the space to each organization within the agency headquarters building. So we have HR, we have like budget, we have CIO, we have other organizations, and each organization has a certain number of people in it, and we allocated about 10% of that space allocated to the people. You know, we did an analysis of how much space they need. It's not one space per person, but there's a certain amount of space, you know, loosely defined for a group of people, and we allocated about 10% of that space as long-term reservations. We gave each organization the ability to decide what they would do with those long-term reservations. And as you can imagine, some organizations, you know, or maybe we might call it more traditional, they assign most of these spaces to their top leaders. Other organizations assign these spaces to their administrative people, their low-level people, so they can be found all the time. People who do the copying, make travel plans for people, those kinds of things. We also created what we called neighborhoods or hubs to put these, you know, so that each the entire building is reservable, and anyone in the organization can make a reservation for any part of the building. But we kind of have neighborhoods. So like on Wednesdays, today's Wednesday, I'm sitting in my neighborhood close to some of my coworkers. Tomorrow, everyone in my office, in my organization, my little organization, tries to, you know, comes in on Thursdays, and we all sit together. But the rest of the week, we either telework, or if I come in the building on Friday, I sit someplace upstairs, which is by myself, because no one else in my organization is there. So we have these neighborhoods or hubs.
Excellent. Now that sort of goes to the next point also, which is accommodating the needs, the specific needs. Are there any other points you want to make about that?
Well, sure, but we certainly have, you know, in addition to having, you know, long-term reservations for certain people, we also have people who need to be near each other all the time if possible. So we created a number of smaller restricted allocations. So we have like 5 desks assigned to 10 people, or 10 desks assigned to 30 people. And these people, for example, contracting people, they need to be together so they can, but you know, because, and they need to be near their files and things like that. So because of the number of people, they all make reservations into that spaces. But once those 5 or 10 spaces are filled, if there are other people in that group in the building, they just make a reservation wherever it's convenient, and it works out well. It gives us kind of a mixture of long-term reservation ability, and the ability for people to know they're going to sit near each other and near their files, but also the flexibility to have you know, a certain amount of broadly reservable space, because on any given day, you know, only 40% or 50% of the organization is in the building to begin with.
Excellent. How about other what's called here special needs within the organization, and how you allocate space in order to serve those needs?
Well, I mean, so it's not really one size fits all. We do have some large organizations, the Public Building Service, which is the landlord, you know, controls, you know, really manages all the federal buildings. It's a large organization with a lot of impact, and the head of that organization does have a need to have dedicated conference room space. You also had to have another organization, the Federal Acquisition Service, which is another large organization, a big part of GSA. It's really the office depot for the government. And these two organizations identified a need for a large conference room for their leaders. But really, even when you boil that down to reality, they were able to, these two leaders were able to share one large conference room. So that room's in the system, it's under special allocation. Only the administrative assistants for those two leaders have access to that room, but they do share it. It's another way of trying to approach reservable space with special needs.
Yeah, it's interesting because people, there's sometimes legitimate resistance to fully shared space. And so what you've done through the system and through your policies is created a structure where people are comfortable moving towards a shared environment and making sure that their needs are going to continue to be addressed. I'm going to move kind of quickly through some other topics just so that we make sure we save time for questions at the end. One of the kind of underlying themes that people have talked about through their conversations here are making sure that it's easy for people to interact with the system and sometimes even interact with the system without even knowing it. So what we've started to do is look at integrating, what we've done is we've integrated with turnstiles and smart building technology so that as people enter a building, they can be checked in to their reservations. The buildings can be powered, the workspaces can be powered up, the HVAC can be activated based on how people are badging in and out of the building. You really need to make sure that the software is easy for people so it doesn't get in their way. That was one of the objections listed early on. If this is too hard, I don't want to do it. So you need to make sure the software is as easy to use and often even transparent for those users, and to really personalize it to the way people want to work, whether it's through something we call a one-click reservation or user-driven defaults in the system. And what this is really about is kind of the evolution of software and user experience. And software has evolved over the last 10 or so years, particularly web-based software, from the primarily driven to share information with people, to software that's driven to automate processes, to where we are today, which is really focusing on and enhancing the experience that people have with software. And I'm going to share some very quick examples here, and I promise I'm not picking on these companies in any way, shape, or form. I just think they're great examples of what I want to talk about. The first one is the Swissair website, and I want to be fair to this company. They have another website called Swiss.com, which is a much more interactive website. But the Swissair.com website, if you go there now, this is what you'll see. And the reason I like this website as an example is because I think everybody on this conversation remembers what the web looked like 10 years ago, where the primary purpose of the web was to distribute information. And yeah, you could do a couple other things on there, but it was mostly about distributing information. And this is kind of what websites were like 10 years ago. And they're sharing information, and if you want to book a flight, you can book a flight over here. Websites then evolved into something that looks like this, and this is one I use all the time. This is United.com, United's website. I think this is a very process-driven website. It's really there's a lot going on, and it's really focused on making sure that anything that you might want to do is right here, but not so much thinking about what you want to do and how you want to do it. It's very effective, it's very usable, I use it all the time, but it's very different from something that looks like this, which is the Virgin Atlantic website. And if you just look at some of the very subtle things that this website did, they ask questions. Where do you want to go? When do you want to go? Well, who's going? And what kind of ticket do you want? So they've really thought about that experience of how people can interact with the system and how to make that experience easier, more understandable, less painful, and so forth. I just think these are three good examples that show the evolution in the way systems work, and something for everyone to think about when you're communicating and when you're building systems and when you're implementing systems for your communities. Think about the experience that people have, and in the spirit of full disclosure, There's some changes we're doing to our software. This is our current website application. It looks a little bit like United's website. It's very process-driven. We've recognized that. We're making changes to it. You guys are the first ones to see this publicly. This is a mock-up of some of our new web application interfaces. In addition to being a more user experience-driven interface, when people log into the system, we're doing some very simple things like checking to see if you have a reservation starting in the next 20, 30, 60 minutes. And if you do, and if you're logging in, well, you're probably logging in to check in. So we'll help you with that. Just like we do with location-based services. As you get close to your building on your iPhone or your Android, a message will go off and say, hey, Torrance, you're close enough to the building now, would you like to check in? So really think about the experience that you want people to have, because if you don't get the experience right, and you don't get the communication right, and you don't get the stakeholder concerns that people have talked about before, if you don't address all of those things, you're going to run into one challenge after another and ultimately not have a successful implementation. So just to try to wrap things up here, some of the summaries of the tactics that we've talked about today: know how to address pushback, particularly from managers. Kate talked about that in her material and how you can educate them and inform them while entertaining them, keep people engaged about how to work in a new workplace environment. When people say they don't have time, they're too busy, no problem. Download it to your iPhone and watch it on the train. Make sure that you're delivering things to the technologies that people want to use where they can do it. If people say it's too hard, make the system invisible. Link the system to your turnstiles. Link the system to location-based services on their cell phones. Tie it into their Outlook and their other smartphone applications like that one customer did that we talked about. When you're changing the environment, constantly communicate. Don had beautiful examples. Pre-change communication, post-change communication. Susan talked about the stakeholders and who you can't forget. Don't forget the administrative assistants. You've got to also accept the fact that people will push back. There's something called the WIFM, what's in it for me, and understand how to address that with people. You've got to address physical needs. Lockers and filing cabinets are on here. You also could have special needs people in your community, and you have to make sure you're addressing the special needs that people may have for technology access, workplace access, and so forth, so that everyone can participate. And when you do use technology, make sure that the technology you use is easy, smart, and captures the data so that you can use it for continuous improvement to measure what's happening, set your benchmarks, define success, measure, and improve. An open question to the panel before we go to Q&A. Are there any other thoughts that people want to put out before we move to Q&A?
I think you've done a great job, Torrance. I'd love to hear what's on their minds.
Great. I'm going to ask a colleague, Doug, are you there?
I'm here, Torrance. I've got the questions that have come in so far.
Thank you.
For those of you who are still on the call and haven't submitted your question yet, please just use the chat functionality on the right-hand side of your WebEx screen to pass a question for the panel. We've actually got quite a few questions already, so I know the panel is agreed to walk past the end of our call here. We'll take as many as we can, and whatever we can answer, we will try to deliver to you over email. The very first question we got was while Don was speaking, and perhaps you can answer this for us quickly. You mentioned that there were all the hoteling was done for people at level 3 and below. Can you describe for those of us not at Booz Allen what that means?
That means that you're not a senior manager or above.
Okay.
Basically the worker bees.
Gotcha.
So what's interesting there, Don, is that we talked about, Mark talked about and I talked about the importance of lead by example. You've proven that it can work without doing that. So there isn't one size fits all. These are what you've learned and how you've been successful in your environment, and what Mark's learned and how he's been successful in his environment. So that's important also. This isn't absolutely prescriptive. It's understand your environment and know how to be successful in it.
Absolutely, and we also have senior managers that will come and they will hotel for a week 2 weeks, or a month, and then they blog about their experience and get feedback from users that way. So we do involve everybody. That's the way it works best for us.
Using that communication and blogging from leaders, we know that at least 2 other large firms, that's worked out really well. That's fantastic. Dawn, there was another question that followed your presentation, and that was, have you seen any evidence that employees seen any evidence that they're benefiting in terms of the paycheck while they're transitioning from the private offices over to hoteling? Is there clear evidence or communication that you share that shows that?
No. Not in their paycheck, but I mean, we've been able to reduce, our real estate. We've closed quite a few buildings lately, and, we've increased how many users per desk. So we're just, you can see the changes that way is how it's been measured here. Right. Okay.
And the next question was, is it possible to better understand where the data is coming from? And Torrance, I'm guessing that was the slide that you showed on actual utilization versus capacity within a particular office.
Well, there are certainly ways to track the interfaces people use, who's making the reservations, are people doing it on someone's behalf or not. So yeah, it is important, and that's another one of those things to watch. And we've seen changes in our customers over time where our kiosk, which is still very highly used, but its usage is going down as the smartphone, Android, iPhone application use is going up. So that's an important metric to keep your eye on, because that's telling you in quantitative terms how are people choosing to interact with the software and the system.
Sure. And there's a kind of a follow-up question that came a few minutes later that maybe anybody on the panel can answer. I'm guessing Susan and Mark will probably have their perspectives on this. What kind of data is the most beneficial to collect? Is it things like productivity? Is it like the number of people who are in the office, the number of people who are working from home? What's the best kind of data to collect and then review?
Can I just, I will comment on productivity. We are very careful to stay away from that piece of data. And the reason is, unless a department themselves are measuring and have a benchmark measurement that they use for productivity, I would never claim, I would be very careful in claiming any level of productivity increase, because they need to have a really systematic way that they measure it. And so if we do have a client that has, because we have some call center, and if they heard me call them a call center, they'd be very angry, but we call them kind of call center type environments, that they do have some productivity measures that they have, and what we will ask them to do is to benchmark early when we're just kicking off the project, and then we'll go have them then do their measurement probably 5, 6, 7 months later, because you have to get people through that curve of 3 to 5 to 7 months of actually getting into the new environment, and then benchmark again, and then look at that data, but only if they have their own productivity measures that they use. So I just wanted to comment on productivity. So that's one we actually steer away from. But the other one is not as much as whether or not people are coming in is really important, kind of that badge and show up rate. I don't know what people use different acronyms for it. The other thing that's really important to be able to understand, and sometimes it's harder to get this data, is what are they doing when they're in. So with Cisco being an incredibly mobile environment, what becomes important to us is when they do come in, what are they doing? Are they collaborating? Are they doing heads-down work? Are they going to the lab? What are they doing when they come in? Because that helps us know what type of space and it needs to be made available. And that we do through other types of data collection, through either focus groups, business intelligence gathering, or observation studies, to really understand when they're in, what are they doing. So I just wanted to throw that in.
That's fascinating.
So for GSA, I think what's of interest to us is utilization. We want to know how densely is the building being utilized, and can we move more people into the building and so that's one of the key measures that we look at. We also have a certain amount of space that's reserved. We have a certain amount of touchdown space. So we're also interested in knowing what percentage of people are coming to the building and just sitting at a space. A touchdown space doesn't need a reservation, but it doesn't have any IT resources, no keyboard, no port replicator, no monitor. But everybody has a laptop assigned to them, so they just come in and open the laptop and get to work. So we're interested in knowing, how many of those people are coming into the building. And we're also interested in knowing, about our conference rooms. When are all the conference rooms of a certain size booked and not available to be reserved? That's kind of another measure we're looking at. And we also want to know if there are times when all the conference rooms in a certain area are not used. And if we can figure out a trend, because we might want to close a part of the building to save energy.
That's really interesting. Mark, there's another question that's a couple down here, but I think it's perfect timing for this. Somebody pointed out that you said that not everybody has to check in every day. If that's true, then what are you doing to measure the utilization for the people who aren't going through some kind of check-in process?
Well, that's kind of unknown. It's hard to measure that piece of it. So if you come into the building and you sit down in a touchdown space, then you don't have to check in. So what we will be doing is turning on what we call turnstile check-in. We have some turnstiles being installed at the entrances of the building. Everybody will eventually pass through the turnstiles. So we'll have a measure of everybody who comes to the building. Everybody has the turnstiles. In order to get through the turnstile, you'll have to use your badge, your access card, and we'll have a measure of everybody who comes into the building, and we'll know how many have reservations and how many don't have reservations, and then we'll have a delta.
Great. And then it was actually one more question that came directly from your slides there, Mark. Are you capturing utilization on the touchdown spaces? Is there any way for you to measure that, knowing that I guess people aren't coming into the building, or is that more just a kind of a casual observation, kind of how well are our unreserved touchdown spaces being used?
Well, that relates to the previous answer. So we'll have a delta. We do have a certain number of people who come to the building who are not assigned to the building. We'll have a measure of that. So we'll have a measure of people who come to the building with a reservation who are assigned to the building, people who come to the building without a reservation who are assigned to the building, people who come to the building who are not assigned to the building and either do or don't have a reservation, because somebody assigned to another building can still make a reservation here as long as they're an employee. And so we'll have those measures, and we'll be able to look at that and analyze that. To some degree, even reservable space, if like on a Monday and Friday when the building is very empty, people can just walk in and sit down at a reservable space and not make a reservation. There's no workspace police going around and grabbing people and chasing them away. As long as somebody else doesn't have a reservation there, you can just go in and sit there. So we have the same kind of issue. So a certain number of people might be sitting in reservable space without a reservation. And so when we have the turnstiles operating full time and everybody turnstile, badging in, we'll have those measures.
Okay, perfect. Well, the next question we have here in the queue, and I apologize for taking so long to get to these, Kate or Dawn probably have some good perspective on this. Do you have suggestions for improving the morale, the communications when hoteling is first being implemented, but there's still lots of unknowns? Specifically things like employees asking questions, but we don't have the information just yet from higher-ups, don't have the information from facilities yet. What are some good ways for dealing with those kinds of unknowns?
This is Kate. I'll take a shot at that. And I think, first of all, is try to get as much information of those unknowns clarified before you launch, because the more they understand what the program is and isn't, the more confident they will be when they deploy. And you'll never be able to recreate that first moment of deployment. And the stronger that you do that, and the more comprehensive and the more comfortable people feel with it, the higher level of success and adoption you're going to get. So that would be my first point. The second one is to be able to have, a very visible way for being able to address those frequently asked questions. And we keep a lot of those, or address a lot of them in our courses, but I think also being able to have a robust website where you can keep that information available to all and you can continue to add to it, I think can be a really easy way to make sure that people understand what it is and it isn't. But I think in terms of keeping the momentum going and keeping a lot of engagement with this space is to really capture some of these great testimonials that start to come forward and play them out. So it's not the real estate or the IT or facilities teams that are communicating this, but it's really the business and having people to state that it's improving the way the work-life balance, or it's improving the way in which they're able to work and to get things done, and be able to have, how they appreciate the level of choice. So being able to weave in some of the messages and those comments from video's great and being able to share it with a broader audience. But I think when you go into deployment, you've got to actually pick up more of your marketing piece. But those are a few thoughts. Don, any others from you?
I think you really touched on it great. We also use Yammer, and people can write in questions, and we always have somebody that goes through and they collect everything that's been asked, and then we get back to them in a timely manner.
And Dawn, you've also got kind of a chain of command. You've got a really well-defined set of resources and like help desks kind of things. Did you guys build that with hoteling information in it before you went live, or was that more of an IT thing that evolved into also answering hoteling questions?
We did it before we went live, but once we went live, we went back and made specific tabs for like concierge, how to route them. So these types of things would go to the concierge, others would go to my team. So we really went in and redefined it after we went live.
Okay, so you set up like different topics within an existing ticket system, and when somebody picked out a hoteling topic, it went to a different set of responders than like a networking or a PC kind of issue.
Right, exactly.
Okay. There's another question here.
I was just going to say, at GSA, we published a couple of documents, something called House Rules, which explain how the hoteling system works and how hoteling in general works and the rules of the building. We also did something called Waves, where before people moved into the building in their previous buildings, and before those buildings were closed, they went through like a one week or a 2-week time where they were told they could sit anywhere except in their own desk, and we had like hoteling spaces set up so they could get the feel of it and kind of get a feeling for how things will work in the headquarters building when they move there.
Perfect. Dawn, there's another question here. I think when you were talking about your post-rollout, what kinds of questions do you answer in the feedback sessions? Have there been any eye-opening answers or suggestions that you received during the feedback?
We received all kinds of questions about, that's how we came up with a lot of our special needs allocations, because people are like, I can't work like this, I need 2 monitors, or, I have doctor's prescription for ergonomically correct desks. So we had to allocate those things out. We also took some of the system requests that people had, and worked with AgilQuest to kind of finagle things differently for us that made more sense for the users. We really got anything from that you can imagine. I mean, all types of questions, all types of suggestions. And we just, we took them, and we had like, I think it was 16 different work streams throughout the corporation for hoteling. So we would take back all the user feedback, and we would vet the ones that we felt were the most imperative. And we would go through those and do everything possible to make the changes for the users. And, some of them are feasible, some of them are just like, you got to suck it up a little bit. But it really, you'd be surprised the feedback that you'll get.
But it definitely sounds like a critical thing to do if you want the long-term success from it. There's another question here that sounds very similar. How do you manage space for an employee whose work involves sensitive phone communications, like HR or a policy or a compliance specialist?
Well, we do have different space for different people, and and hoteling sometimes doesn't work for some people. Some people do have dedicated space when there's a special need for it. We also have different space allocated for people that work on sensitive documents and things like that, like certain quarters of the floor that are sectioned off for them, and you know, you just have to come up and be creative with different ways of handling it.
Sure. The next question here, I think, was very specifically for Mark. How did you decide on the amount to allocate, the 10% to allocate to the? They're talking about LTR here, but I'm sure it means the permanent assigned seats. How did you figure out what percentage to assign to permanently assigned seats?
We just kind of took a guess.
Okay.
It just kind of seemed right. We know we know how many spaces we have in the building. What we really wanted to do was allocate a certain number of spaces, building overall in the entire building to long-term reservations, and we just kind of divided them up among these separate organizations. It's not an exact science. I think the point really is, and people really see that once you get in the building, you don't really need those long-term reservations as much as you think you do when you're coming from permanent space. But it's a transition for people, so people have to transition.
Mark, that's a great point. What people think they need and what they need after they've embraced a new way of work is different. And sometimes you do have to help people through that transition in a way that's acceptable to them, but is still driving you towards your goals.
I mean, we haven't really addressed it yet, but GSA has a strong telework program where people can telework several days a week. So, and people are out of the office normally on, leave, they're sick or they're on vacation just normally, or they're at conferences, or, some people are like salespeople, they're customers. GSA supports a lot of other agencies, so a lot of people are at customer visits. So the need to be in the office is really reduced, and the feeling that they need to be in the office, it doesn't necessarily match up to the reality. And
sure,
we said we were going to measure people. We're going to give people 6 months to a year in this format, and then we'll kind of do an analysis and we want to understand if people with long-term reservations are really in the building as much as they say they were going to be, and if they're not, then we talked about possibly pulling that space back. But my approach, I'm OCIO, so I'm kind of on the implementation side. So it's not really my call on doing that. But that's the thinking here.
Well, Mark, that's really interesting. I guess I hadn't heard before an organization setting an expectation of we're going to roll this particular program and this particular I guess set of parameters and policies out. We're going to measure for 6 months, and then we're going to reevaluate. I hadn't heard that approach before. I'm going to be really curious to hear how that works out. I think that's a great way to go. Susan, our last question here before we really should wrap up, and thanks again for everybody spending some extra time here. When you were speaking about the different kinds of space, somebody asked, what are the different kinds of space? Like, just generally, what different kinds of space do you allocate? And you made some comment about things changed when your programmers went from something else, probably a waterfall, to an agile. Can you describe even just basically what the change in the workspace looked like during that period?
Sure. So it's kind of a two-part answer. In a lot of our buildings, we have like 350-some buildings worldwide in our portfolio. So in a lot of those buildings, we're still in the old cube conference room office space types. That's really what's there. And as we go into the Cisco Connected Workplace, the cubicle goes away and the office goes away as a space type, and we start bringing in more activity-based work environment where you have workstations, you have audio privacy room, video privacy rooms, quiet rooms, you have telepresence rooms of different sizes, you have conference rooms obviously of different sizes, multi-purpose rooms, e-cafes, soft seating, open collab. We have a whole suite of space types that we put within a building, and the ratios of how we put those in are determining upon who's the major occupant of the building, anything from sales to engineering and everything in between. And so based upon who's in the building and what we were using, and recently as we started to see the engineering organization, which makes up probably 60% of our company, switching from the old waterfall development style, which is a lot of heads down, more siloed, more this gets passed to that person, which then gets passed to that person. It's a different kind of development. Some of you on the phone may know it better than I'm describing it. But that going into that agile Scrum engineering where everything's kind of happening at once, they actually needed now agile Scrum engineering, both for large scale and standing, so where you have a lot of open wall space because of the way that agile engineering is done and the methodology that they use to do it. So they needed now new spaces to be able to come in with a large number of people as well as remote people, and because we're Cisco, we have a lot of that wonderful technology, so we have the ability to have remote engineers with other people in the Scrum or in the Agile area, and there's certain requirements that they need to be able to do that practice, both, like I said, in large scale and then sometimes in smaller scale, because now instead of people being set up by business group, they're being set up with people that are, you've got the developers with the testers, with sometimes the sales guy, with the person that's going to do all the testing, I might have said testing, but all the different support that may do support later on, and they're all sitting together now as they do this development. So it's a little bit different in how we're having to support them and creating some new space types to support their new way of working. Did that answer?
Well, this is Torrance. Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. I'd like to thank certainly Kate, Susan, Don, and Mark for coming and sharing their experiences with us, and every one of you listening and watching around the country, around the world, trying to make your workplace program more effective. Thank you for spending some time with us. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And please remember, we have part 2 of this series next month. That one is titled Creating a Workplace in Which Your People Want to Work. So please join us for that. And until then, thank you from everyone here at AgilQuest.